So next thing on the agenda after the culture was racism topic. So we will talk about what is racism and anti-racism. Uh, just want to let you know that this is just small part of a much bigger issue, right? Racism is a deep problem that affects many parts of our society. And it's important to understand both its history and how it shows up today. We'll look at how racism hurts individuals and communities. We'll also discuss ways to fight against it, learning from people like Robin D. Angelo and Ibram X. Kendi, and movements like the Civil Rights Movement and Black Lives Matter. It's important to focus on peace and nonviolence while addressing these issues. And specifically in the US, talking about race is especially important because it influences so many other parts of life, right? So by understanding and addressing racism first, we can work toward a better, equitable society for everyone. So now I'll stop talking and we will watch this video. Right, welcome back, and I hope that video was helpful. I personally thought I learned so much from that video. So let's take a moment again. Feel free to pause while jotting down this thoughts. So let's do reflection on this video. So what thoughts and feelings do you have about people from different cultures? That's question number one. Question number two, how did Baratunde approach in this video make you think differently about race and racism? And third question for your journal is, what are some easy things you can do inspired by Baratunde's video's message to help create a more inclusive and respectful society? So let's take about 5 minutes or so and then jot down, and then I'll see you on the next slide. So before we dive more into and learning more about basic intercultural competency, let's understand why is it important to learn more about the history of racism. We cannot fully grasp intercultural competency without examining the historical context of racial and cultural issues. History provides many examples of racism that have deeply affected societies around the world. And I hope by looking at these events and sharing with you all, some of you all, I'm pretty sure already aware of it, but I hope that with some of you all that not aware of this, I hope we can understand the roots of racism and see why it continues to exist today. This knowledge is crucial for understanding the basic concept of intercultural competency training and to also addressing these issues effectively, right? So let's explore a few significant historical examples that highlight the pervasive nature of racism and its long-lasting impacts on various communities. So starting with transatlantic slave trade. Starting in the 16th century, millions of Africans were forcibly taken to the Americas and sold as enslaved people. This brutal practice was justified through pseudoscientific theories that claimed racial hierarchies, dehumanizing African people, and perpetuating systemic racism. Then colonialism. European powers colonized large part of Africa, Asia, and the Americas, often exploiting and oppressing indigenous populations. Colonialism imposed foreign control and cultural dominance, leading to long-lasting social and economic disparities. And then apartheid in South Africa. From 1948 to the early 1990s, South Africa enforced a system of racial segregation known as apartheid. This system severely restricted the rights of non-white citizens, institutionalizing racial discrimination and inequality. Then there was also Japanese internment camps. During World War II, the US government forcibly reallocated Japanese Americans to internment camps due to racial prejudice. This unjust action was driven by fear and suspicion, stripping Japanese Americans of their rights and freedoms. These examples highlight the systematic and institutionalized nature of racism throughout history. What I'm sharing here are just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sharing tip of the iceberg so that we understand these events to help us recognize the deep-rooted issues that continue to affect societies even today. It also underscored the importance of intercultural competency in addressing and dismantling racism. So, to gain a deeper understanding, I encourage you to participate in workshops on racism and reframing workshops. These workshops provide valuable insights and tools to further your knowledge and commitment to creating a more inclusive and equitable world. Because the talk, the the historical example that I just shared, it doesn't end here. So I highly encourage, if you haven't taken any of the workshops around racism and racial justice, I highly encourage you to either take the workshops or do research. Google is free. Please educate yourself. And then we'll move to next slide. So on previous slide, we looked at historical example. Now let's take a look contemporary example of racism, right? That we still face today. So understanding these current problems is really important for building basic intercultural competency and creating a more inclusiveness in the future. Systemic racism in the US means that there are built-in inequalities within our institutions, like schools, workplaces, housings, healthcare, and the justice system. People of color often face disadvantages in these areas because of these ingrained biases. Recognizing and addressing systematic racism is a key part of understanding basic intercultural competency. Then racial profiling, right? This is when law enforcement target people of color more frequently for stops, searches, and arrests based on stereotypes and biases. It's unfair and creates mistrust in communities. So basic intercultural competences help us understand and respect people's diverse experiences, reducing the use of harmful stereotypes. Xenophobia and Islamophobia, especially after 9/11, there was a big increase in negative feelings and policies against Muslim communities in America. This kind of prejudice is called xenophobia and Islamophobia, and it can lead to hate crimes and discrimination. Intercultural competency teaches us to be more understanding and accepting of a different cultural and religious backgrounds. Racism in sports. Racism also shows up in sport, where athletes of color might face racial abuse and discrimination. This is a reminder that racism can be found in many areas of life. By promoting intercultural competency, we can work towards making all environments, including sports, more inclusive and respectful. These current issues show that racism isn't just a problem of the past, it's something we still need to address today. By understanding these contemporary forms of racism, we can better equip ourselves to challenge and dismantle them. Intercultural competency is very important in this process because it helps us build respectful and empathetic relationships, challenge our biases, and work towards to a better world. Now let's talk about impact of racism on individuals. How racism directly affects individuals in various aspects of their lives. These impacts show why it's so important to address and challenge racism to create a more equitable and inclusive society. Let's start with health disparities. Racism significantly impacts health outcomes for individuals. People of color often face barriers to accessing quality healthcare, which leads to higher rates of chronic diseases, mental health issues, and lower life expectancy. For example, systematic biases can result in unequal treatment in medical settings, meaning people of color might not have received the same level of care as others. This contributes to ongoing health disparities that affects overall well-being. Economic inequality. Racism also played a major role in creating economic disparities. Discriminatory practices in hiring, promotions, and pay can limit opportunities for people of color, resulting in lower income and economic instability. This inequality means that individuals might struggle to advance in their careers or access quality housing, perpetuating cycles of poverty and limiting economic growth for these communities. Psychological effects. The psychological impact of experiencing racism can be profound. Individuals who face racism might develop anxiety, depression, and decreased sense of self-worth. The constant stress of dealing with discrimination and bias can lead to long-term mental health issues, affecting personal well-being and quality of life. It's important to recognize these effects and provide support to those who experience them. Lastly, social exclusion. Racism can lead to social exclusion, where individuals are marginalized and isolated from social networks and resources. This isolation can limit their access to opportunities for education, employment, and personal growth. It can also create a sense of loneliness and detachment from the broader community, making it harder for individuals to build supportive relationships and thrive. Let's talk about how racism impacts our society as a whole. These societal effects are a big deal and show why it's so important to address and combat racism to build a stronger, more cohesive, inclusive, equitable community for everyone. First, let's look at social tensions, right? Racism creates and worsens social tensions. It leads to conflict and division between different racial and ethnic groups, making it harder for communities to live and work together peacefully. These tensions can result in protests, unrest, and a generally sense of instability within society. Next, we have the economic costs. Racism isn't just a social issue, it also has significant economic cost. Discriminatory practices in employment, education, and housing lead to a less efficient and productive workforce. When people are excluded or marginalized, society losses out on their potential contributions. Additionally, dealing with consequences of racism, such as healthcare and legal costs, places a financial burden on society. Then there's a cultural loss. Racism leads to a loss of cultural richness and diversity. When certain groups are marginalized or their contributions undervalued, society misses out on their unique perspectives, traditions, and innovations. This cultural loss can weaken the social fabric and reduce the vibrancy and creativity of our community. We also need to consider public health. Racism's impact on public health is huge. Discriminatory practices and systematic inequities contribute to health disparities, affecting the overall well being of marginalized groups. Poor health outcomes in these communities lead to higher healthcare costs and strain public health systems. Moreover, the stress and trauma from experiencing racism have long term effects on mental health, further impacting public health. Last but not least, there are polarizations. Racism contributes to societal polarization, creating an us versus them mentality. This fosters divisions and hostility between different groups, which undermine social cohesion. When societies are polarized, it's harder to find common ground and work together towards shared goals. This polarization can also hinder efforts to address broader societal issues effectively. By understanding these societal impacts, we can see the broader consequences of racism. Addressing and challenging racism isn't just about helping individuals, it's about creating a more united, equitable, and resilient society for everyone. All right, so we just covered a lot of important information. So if you would like, please take a moment. This is the time to, take a break, or if you already take a break, that's great. Because we're gonna talk about another important aspect, right? So, like I said, we just cover a lot of important ground, looking at the historical and contemporary examples of racism and understanding their profound impacts on individuals and society as a whole. Now, let's shift gears a bit and dive into another crucial aspect of basic intercultural competency, and that is understanding and recognizing biases.